Welcome back to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. In these episodes, I sit down with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes, and my guest today is Sarah Kalogerakis. Sarah is the co-founder of Greatpoint HR, a platform redefining compensation with continuous real-time market signals. With over 20 years in compensation technology, she's built and scaled some of the industry's most impactful data sets. Her work focuses on challenging outdated HR practices and unlocking the full potential of people data to drive fair, competitive, and more effective workplaces. Welcome to Behind the Build. Thanks for joining me, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. And the bio itself, I think, like flashes signs of why you're here, because we talk about a lot of this stuff. But before we dive into it, you've spent like 2 decades in compensation technology. So I have to know, like, what pulled you into this space, because it's not the most obvious like starting point for a career.
No, it's not. And when you put it like that, it makes it sound even longer. Yes, over 2 decades in this space. And I, like most people that I've met in compensation, specifically compensation technology, it's not a path anybody, necessarily sets out on. You don't kind of grow up being like, I really want to be in
Yeah.
compensation when I grow up. It's more that compensation tends to find you, and I think everybody has an interesting story as to how they got into it. And I'm no different. It was very actually serendipitous that I got a job right out of college, working at a software startup that was building kind of one of the first compensation technology
Oh,
platforms.
wow.
Um, yeah, and I stayed with it, and that one choice had sort of profound impact on my life and my personal and professional life, and all kind of led up to and culminated in starting Greatpoint HR. So yeah.
You so your bio talks about building and scaling some of the most impactful data sets in the industry. Tell me a little bit about what that means, and why, what did you learn, I guess, from those builds that you carried with you into Greatpoint?
Yeah, definitely not, the most necessarily exciting or popular topic. I don't, pull it out at cocktail parties often, but I love it. I really do, and I found my way working on data sets during my career. I conducted compensation surveys at one point. I helped
Oh,
launch
okay.
a survey kind of business within a business, and it taught me a lot just about data, what data actually captures, how you got to architect it, how sort of legacy habits really impact data, which is why I think being in the space for 25 years and seeing the technology progression has been really fascinating, because when I started, we were printing and putting in 3-ring binders and shipping, mailing results out. And so
Wow.
if you think about, and maybe you don't, but having to fit something on a page, an 8 by half and 11 page, like really influences how you design a survey and architect it. And we don't have to, have those constraints now, but changing habits is hard. So seeing that evolution and being able to sort of enact that change throughout my career has been really exciting.
I guess I never really thought about that. It's lovely how now people can scroll, and you're not bound by 11 inches. Um, so I'm curious then, what was the moment or the frustration that made you decide to start Greenpoint instead of just continuing to build inside somebody else's platform?
Well, that gets a little spicy. I'm gonna keep it, uh, on the up and
PG.
up.
Sure.
Basically, when you work for yourself, as you know, you can build what you think needs to be
Yeah.
built, and there's no excuses, which is good or bad, but you're not beholden to anybody else's roadmap, anybody else's priorities,
Yeah.
anybody else's feeling as to what's the best decision for the company, the product, the clients. Now I get to make those calls myself, and so
I love
I
that.
do.
Well, walk me through Greenpoint, or excuse me, Greatpoint. What does the platform do, and who shows up on your doorstep needing it the most?
Yeah, so at sort of the highest level, Greatpoint HR is a market pricing platform. We help compensation teams and HR teams manage their compensation data, and usually that's a combination of external third party survey data combined with their internal employee pay data. Greatpoint HR, we have our own proprietary data set that our clients can use as well. And that's sort of the basic activity, right? Companies need to determine how to pay their employees. They
Yeah.
typically want to be fair and competitive, and they want to benchmark their pay practices against their peers. That's sort of the basic activity. What Greatpoint HR kind of brings to the table that I think is a little different is we really believe in contextualizing compensation. So enabling companies and comp professionals to not just see one sort of number or a handful of numbers, but see all the context around how that number came to be. Sort of the the supply of labor influences how companies pay their employees, right? The demand for that skill or that role influences it. The macroeconomics influences. So there's tons of environmental influencers that aren't traditionally captured by saying, you know, what's the average pay
Yeah.
of a product manager.
My God, like my brain's exploding with a million questions. One of the things that stood out on your site is this idea of future proofing salaries. Um, I'm curious what that specifically kind of means in practice, right? I mean, things are constantly changing, right? So how is that different from how comp has, I guess, been traditionally been done? So practically speaking, yeah, maybe talk to me about future proofing salaries.
Yeah, and I admit, that's a big bold claim. And nobody can predict the future, right? Nobody predicted COVID, changing everyone's lives overnight. But the idea is that if we continuously provide this contextual data, so
Mhm.
in terms of streaming, any impacts or influencers that are going to be affecting employees' pay, and that could be organizational, structural changes, team changers, hiring, firings, bringing all of that context in addition to their traditional data sources of what companies pay their employees and what they're paying their internal employees. It allows the company to stop only being retroactive, right? Only looking in the rearview mirror at pay and getting a better understanding of what's happening now. And
Mhm.
then by tracking this over time, it allows our models, right, to be trained and to start being more predictive. And so, in terms of future proofing, that starts to think about what if we knew the skills that were going to be needed in the workforce or in my particular company. Maybe I have frontline worker needs, or maybe I have AI engineering needs.
Mhm.
And so by capturing all the data basically we possibly can, and using it to train our models, we can get to a place where we are better at predicting the needs and the future needs of the company and the future supply of the workforce. Are you going to find these skills? Where are you going to find them? And so that's kind of what that is
I
talking about.
I love that. I love so many of the things on your website. I mean, the tagline, negotiate less, hire more. Unpack that one for me. What does that cost when companies get that wrong?
Well, yeah, and that's like I think maybe one of the most variable or debated statistic out there because you can probably find a study or a claim that an empty position or someone turning over because they're unhappy, whether it's because of their pay or something else, can cost anywhere. I've seen from $25,000 a year or 1x to 2x that employee's salary,
Hmm.
right? So the cost is a little bit variable, except I'll just say it's a lot. And
It's, it's
it's a lot more than companies realize, especially at scale, right? That's one employee I was talking about. Um, if you have empty seats or constant turnover in multiple, dozens, hundreds of roles, it's going to cost you a lot. Our particular stance is U.S. companies lost $500 billion last year alone due to employee turnover.
woof.
So, and obviously, more goes into an employee staying or being hired into a company and staying and thriving than just compensation.
Right.
But compensation is a really big piece of it.
Well, when we first talked, you said something that kind of stuck with me a little bit because it's never really been a way that I had thought about it, but it made a lot of sense. This idea of compensation is only half of the coin, right? That pay and engagement are sort of two sides of the same coin. And the industry, you talked about how the industry is really building one side of it at a time, which fascinated me. Talk to me a little bit more about that. Give some context, I guess, and then I can ask you some questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this isn't, a judgment or trying to find blame or fault to anyone or any company. But I think in terms of software and solutions, we do tend to focus on one side of that. And then as a companies, hiring managers, they're left trying to sort of combine the two sides, but I don't know how successful they are. And so, what I mean by that is an employee retention. I think all companies are trying to increase retention. Not
Hmm.
necessarily across the board. I think there are some roles that companies are okay with some type of turnover, and maybe that's just their approach. But in general, companies want employees to stay at their company, right? And so there's a couple different levers they can pull, or they can, whatever dials they can twist and turn to impact that, compensation being a big one. But then there's this other intangible, right? These other harder things to measure, like, are they engaged? Do they have a good manager? Do they see a good career path?
Mm.
All of those other things. And so while I think there's different products out there, to run engagement surveys, to measure performance reviews, and everyone does an annual survey, and our product is helping determine that the pay is fair and competitive, but really being able to combine all of those things, I think is the best way, to give a clearer picture of the workforce, which is
Right.
why I was so, excited to talk to you and about what you guys are doing.
I I think that's a smart way to think about it. I think that a lot of retention conversations these days they tend to lead with culture and belonging and recognition and all that stuff. But do you think from where you sit that maybe the industry sort of overcorrected away from pay?
I don't know. I think what I've seen happen again over a very long time is pay has become obviously a more acceptable thing to talk about.
Yeah.
You have TikTokers and influencers just asking people what they pay, which was unheard of. And so I think it has invited, I don't know, maybe different feelings about pay, or it is still, I believe it is still a primary driver, but it has definitely given way to these other things like you mentioned, culture and
It makes me
belonging.
think one of the one of the things you mentioned when we chatted, which I thought, which frankly I agreed with, right? Pay is probably probably never going to drop below being one of, if not the most important factor, like the single most important factor. But other things, like you're talking about, are sort of rising to meet it, maybe collectively, right? There might not be one single element that rivals it the same way, but collectively. And I guess what I'd be curious about is what does that shift look like from inside the comp data that you actually see?
Well, that's a great question, and because right now traditional comp data, and this is something we're trying to solve for eventually, it doesn't capture that.
Yeah.
And so you're left kind of trying, there's a leap, right? When someone leaves a company or you have turnover, there's usually speculation.
Hmm.
And I think, if they were paid significantly less than the external market says they should be paid, or significantly less than peers doing the same, role in that company, it's not a huge leap of faith to be like, well, they left for more money. But you don't always know. And it would a raise have kept them? Maybe,
Right,
but for
right,
how long? Right? 3 months, 6 months, 12. So there is a lot of unknown, again, because it's not tabular,
right.
data points that is as easy to track.
This but this is what I love about your future proofing concept because, right, and you talk about some of the AI models and how you can look and do forward thinking because exactly what you're talking about. It's like when somebody leaves, you end up having to do it's more and you review all the data and you review all the information and you try to find out, right? You're looking retrospectively, right? You're doing a postmortem when you could have been doing more predictive analysis, right? And when you're working with things in front of you, you have the ability to, I guess, make the moves that you need to, right, in order to put yourself in a position to succeed, rather than, like I said, doing that postmortem after somebody's already left and trying to figure out why, and then hope that
Yeah.
whatever you do moving forward doesn't cause the same problem. And so, I just think that this is sort of a this is another just little backdoor into supporting, I guess, the way that you approach future proofing these salaries, so that maybe you don't have to do it, that way.
Yeah, well, you can also sort of zoom out a bit, right? So, I forget when, maybe 10 years ago, at some point, the industry sort of started using the concept of total rewards
Yeah.
more, right? So you don't have a compensation team, you have a total rewards team. And while sometimes it's just semantics and there's not a ton of meat behind it. Sometimes it really is meaningful, and the company is really truly trying to take a wider view and understand that it's not just compensation, it's the entire total rewards package that is, sort of the being exchanged between employer to employee. Like, yes, we are paying you money to work here, but we're also providing, and now we get into all of the,
Yeah. The other
perks and
things.
benefits and training and all these other rewards, that I do think have become more prominent, or playing a more prominent role. And all of this sort of ties into there are some companies who are trying to proactively retain employees, by giving them things they value,
Yeah.
and they, it's not everybody, but there are people who are trying to be more proactive about, to your point, going to the doctor instead of the coroner.
Um, I like that. I've never used that before, and I'm totally going to steal it from you. Going to the doctor instead of the coroner. Um, for 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 maybe like an SMB leader listening right now, and I'm thinking somebody maybe who's like an owner or an operator, or kind of somebody we might refer to as the HR of one.
Yeah.
Somebody who knows obviously that pay matters. Maybe they don't have a comp team or a total rewards team. They don't have the benchmarks. They're mostly guessing, right? Kind of what we alluded to earlier. Um, What do you think is the first thing that they're getting wrong? I mean, there's a million things they can do right? But sometimes storytelling on what doesn't land usually, um, makes a better podcast episode. But it's also really, I think, interesting to approach it from that angle, right? So for those folks, what do you feel like they're doing? What's that first thing that they're not getting right?
So, that's a great question. I think, unfortunately, and it's through no fault of their own, the HR of one and these SMB leaders, they're wearing so many hats, and it's really hard to focus. So I think the sort of most detrimental thing they can do is ignore compensation, ignore pay,
Yeah,
and just think, Googling, getting a number, making an offer, and then never thinking about it again is the answer, because without fail, it's going to come back to bite you. As
totally.
it works for one, it may work for two, but as your company grows and employees come on it, it's just going to put you in such a hole, and really just behind the eight ball, that with a little bit of planning, I think you can really set yourself up for success. And that goes for pay, but also for sort of the structure of your organization. When I say that, I mean your job
Yeah.
titles. And
I think you really just nailed a lot of it. I think that here we talk a lot about that SMB squeeze, right? There's tool fatigue, there's managers wearing all those hats, right? There's no dedicated HR function. Um, I think that from a comp lens, SMBs tend to underestimate a lot about pay strategy. Um, would like your comments on that in a second, but like I see very much, them approaching pay reactively, right? And somebody threatens to leave, they counter, right? Somebody asks for a raise, what'd you say? They Google a number, right? And the reality is, um, it probably happens more frequently than we realize, if not most of the time. I'm curious, and maybe this is more like anecdotally speaking, like what's that real cost of running comp that way, right? If SMBs tend to underestimate it so much, they're doing things so reactively and just running on instinct without a real plan, how does that cost them in the long run?
yeah, it's costly,
I bet.
I will say. And I think part of the challenge is that it's not necessarily costly right away. It's one of those things that kind of grows in the shadows. It kind of, takes a while, and it's not going to be till down the road that you're going to sort of uncover. Oh my gosh, it's like if you every time you cleaned up your house, you just threw something in the closet, right? And oh, it's clean, and you kept throwing it in the
Yeah.
closet. At some point, you're gonna go and you're gonna open that closet, and it's going to be an avalanche of. And that's a lot of what happens with
Yeah.
compensation. It happens around your job titles. I see that the most frequently, because when you're a starter, be like, call yourself whatever you want.
Yeah.
You wanna be the VP
Exactly.
of everything? Awesome. I'm paying
Mm.
you $35,000, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't you're because titles are free.
Yeah.
And so I see that a lot, and then try and retitle and re-level and bring order into that, and it's not just words anymore, it's people.
Yeah.
And if you wanna take a VP title away from someone,
Right.
it doesn't go well.
I didn't even think about that. You've said something that I think, while we see it and we hear it at every SHRM conference and HR tech, there's a lot of people in HR aren't really ready to say out loud. And this is sort of pivoting to maybe like the redrawing of what work is
Mm,
and AI, but that AI is essentially going to change the definition of jobs and how
mhm.
companies value the employees and what a worker even like is, I think. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, what I mean is, and we're already seeing this today, a manager. So traditionally, some companies would distinguish between a people manager and more of like, a process manager. But we're now seeing, because of AI, companies saying we don't need managers,
Yeah.
pure managers anymore. And I think that's a huge mistake, to be honest. But so that's a job that I think is being redefined. Entry level jobs, I think, are going to be, again, in certain, any sort of technology or in office entry level
Mhm.
jobs, right? Not necessarily frontline workers yet,
Right.
um, but those jobs are going to be significantly changed. I think, right now the fear is that companies aren't hiring them. Um, I think, so that definition of a job and what a job means, I think, is changing more, meaning that the duties and responsibilities of these jobs are changing in scope, and changing because of AI. I think similarly, how you value an employee is changing, and
Yeah.
I think skills-based pay is becoming a popular term again. It never really went away, but it kind of sees its a rise and fall in popularity, and I think that's coming back. Because if AI can do things, do you need, humans to have that skill, or how do you value it now? I think the biggest thing for me is I'm not sure we know yet. And I think there are some companies making a lot of big bets. Um, and then I think that for the most part, we're waiting to see how it all plays out, because it's just still changing so rapidly.
You told a you told a story which I think is sort of relevant here, right? About someone in education whose job AI can probably do better than they can, and that the people who keep their jobs are really the ones who learn to engineer the systems that are doing that work. Which, first of all, I wholeheartedly agree. I think so much of what I'm passionate about. Um, I understand that as we move into the future of work, pure people managers may become obsolete. And so systems that can actually facilitate that connection, that human connection, are almost going to become more important, right? So that we can maintain that within our organizations. But, inevitably, there's going to be these situations where AI can do jobs better, and those that are ones that are keeping their jobs have learned to engineer those systems doing the work. So, how does that shape what we even mean by job value and market rate?
Well,
Maybe there
that's
aren't
a
any answers. I don't
I
know.
don't know if there are yet. I
Yeah.
mean, the market rate in particular, I think, is one of the things people are kind of waiting to see, because it's so unknown. AI is evolving so quickly, like what it's actually capable of. Um, so I think there's definitely a lot of wait and see. But I do think, and this isn't, an original, thought, but I agree with it, is that the people who AI is not coming for your job necessarily. The people who are going to come out on top are going to be the ones who learn how to harness the power of AI and use it to help them do their job better and more
Yeah.
effectively and more efficiently, because
I 100% agree.
I think that's the power combo, is somebody with experience, lived experience, the knowledge, the expertise, using AI, to just sort of, amplify that. Uh,
I think that, it's collapsing some roles, it's creating others. I fully understand how it's nearly impossible to try and price something that just didn't even exist 18 months ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, right? And it would even make me question or challenge whether or not that traditional survey model is even viable, right? Anymore.
yeah, Well, that's a whole other podcast episode. I could definitely talk a long time about that. I have a number of feelings about that. I do think the general concept of aggregating data across multiple employers as to how what they pay
Mhm.
is value. There's
Yeah.
absolute value in that.
Yeah.
You know, after that, I think the manner and method and structure of it is um, probably could use some updating.
You described a lot of HR as dominated by slow adopters. That also is not a unique position. I feel like HR is typically slow to adopt, new technology, new processes. I mean, where is that caution justified, right? Is it just hiding behind compliance and PII as an excuse? Maybe can you find the rationale?
I mean, I really don't fault them. And I say that again, not as necessarily a negative. I just think that's the way it's been for most HR professionals. And I think what you mentioned weighs in on that. They do have compliance and regulation, and they are dealing with PII and sensitive information. And it's different than marketing, right? In sales, where they can try out a new AI, you know, CRM engine
Yeah.
or easily, and if it goes wrong, like, all right, well, it didn't work out. With HR, they have to be more cautious. So I think the other piece of that is that some AR technology, that what they're using is just brittle and it's not flexible, and changing a job code or a pay range may seem like a great idea to be, we'll go to job based ranges. This is a popular practice in technology companies, but if your 25-year-old system doesn't handle that, you can't do it. So I think it's a combination of things that just doesn't set HR up for
So
tremendous success.
as a founder, then how do you build something innovative and adoptive? How do you avoid being too early? And I'm taking notes here because so
Yeah.
what are these
Well,
secrets?
well, one is like lessons learned. I have been too early with an innovative idea in the past. And that was a great learning experience. I think honestly, and we'll see, a little bit TBD how this plays out. But if you can meet people where they are and bring them along on the innovative journey or the change management or whatever it needs, right? So if you build a product that's at point C and your users are at point A,
Mhm.
walking up to them and being like, hey, come join us at point C, it's hard. Meeting
Yeah.
them at point A, saying, come on, come along for the ride. It's going to be great. You're going to love it over at point C, and sort of shepherding them along and supporting them along the way at the interim point B. Um, that's kind of what I'm betting on. We'll see.
So I'm curious in your mind what do you feel like comes first? And I'm gonna go somewhere interesting with this. But you feel like behavior change and then the software catches up, or do you feel like software unlocks that new behavior?
I think that is the modern day chicken or egg
Chicken in modern day
question.
chicken and egg. Well, okay, here's a sort of a bigger swing of this question. Um, OpenAI recently put out a piece on benefits portability. Right, it's a real conversation happening about decoupling benefits and insurance, right, from the individual employer, especially as more of the workforce is moving towards fractional and contractor and gig work. And from a compensation lens, what happens to total rewards if that decoupling actually goes through?
Well, I don't actually know how that would play out in practice.
Yeah,
I do know from like a software perspective, most software platforms are not set up
right.
to handle those because they were edge cases. So I know a lot of just from history of working with clients and supporting them, their implementation, they don't put fractional consultants, union. There's entire segments of their population that they won't necessarily load into some of these HR tech platforms solely because they can't handle them. I
Yeah.
mean, healthcare is historically a challenge because the software wasn't built to handle it. So I think to your point, if more people start doing it, some software will
Yeah.
have to come and meet the demand for it, but sort of a critical mass thing.
Yeah, I can imagine so. So, future thinking, predictions on where compensation goes in the next 5 years. What changes? What breaks?
Well, so it's funny because I kind of have some of the same predictions that I've had over the years, and they haven't come to fruition yet, but
Yeah.
maybe these are the next 5
This
years.
is the year it's going to happen. What
It
are they?
could be. I think, or I hope, I guess, this concept of real-time data becomes actually uh, real, um, and more concrete, more robust, I guess. Um, because I think that is really key. Having up-to-date data on your employees and on the market is really important for companies making very impactful decisions around compensation. I think AI will absolutely uh, impact the profession. It already is. TBD on exactly how. Um, again, pay is one of those things like AI can't get it wrong. Like you can't send out, a pay stub or a promotion letter that's wrong and take it
Yeah.
back. Like that's hard. Um, I think I don't know. I think those are the big things.
I mean, those are good ones.
I think companies get, and this is something that I am really excited to see and really do hope happens, is that we've already seeing it, right? This pay transparency motion. There's legislations in half of the states, I think, at this point. A big directive coming down in the EU that will inevitably impact the states. So I think there'll be more and more companies actively looking to be transparent about pay and not just to check the box and be compliant, but to really open the doors to have those conversations with the employees and really help employees understand this is how we determine pay here and this is what goes into it and here's where you are.
Do you think that there's, something comp leaders need to get good at now that maybe they're not good at yet? Or I'm curious if you think something becomes maybe more important about how we pay people, even as AI is starting to handle more of the work itself?
I think, and this is not only in compensation, I think in general, getting good at what used to be the soft skills, right? Getting good at communicating
Yeah.
and educating. I was recently speaking to a client who, again, fell into compensation, but their background was in PR,
Okay.
and she mentioned it has been incredibly helpful because comp used to be thought of this back office data, be good at math, be good at data, you don't have much people interaction required. And now it's a lot of it is kind of marketing and in employee relations around pay and communicating pay and really kind of selling a change, right? Shepherding that change management throughout the company. So I think those soft skills will be really important.
So one thing I always like to wrap up with, if a business leader were to come to you and maybe wants to They want to pay their people fairly, competitively, in a way that actually keeps them, but maybe they don't have the team, the comp team, maybe they don't have that HR bench. They don't have time to become one. What's the single most important piece of advice you give them? If you're on an elevator and you just had a minute before the doors open and they walk right out of there, what is it that you're going to tell them?
I guess I'd say don't give up. Like it's worth fighting for. And do the little things. You don't have a whole team. You don't necessarily need to.
Yeah.
Do a little bit every day, every week. Keep, kind of sounding that drum internally that this is important and this will have long lasting impact.
Yeah.
And gather your band.
The little things matter. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate you joining me today. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
And thanks to all you watching and listening to Mustard Hub Voices Behind the Build. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Please visit mustardhub.com to learn more about Mustard Hub and discover how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. Until next time.